Here we're going to introduce the strategy of completing the square to solve a quadratic equation. Here we have a quadratic equation written in standard form, x squared plus 8x minus 20 equals 0. In order to complete the square, what we need to do is to leave the x squared monomial as well as the other x to the first monomial, leave those on the same side of the equation, but take the constant and remove it from the left side and get it over to the other side. So what we would need to do here to remove the minus 20 from the left side is to add 20 to both sides. Well, if I add 20 to both sides, that's going to give me x to the second plus 8x on the left-hand side, because my plus 20 and minus 20 cancel. Then on the right-hand side, I'm going to have the 20 that I just added. So I've taken that 20 now over to the other side of the equation. My minus 20 has now become a positive 20 on the other side. Once I've completed that step, next thing I want to do is I want to take a look at the left side of my equation here, the side that has my variable in it, my variable terms. And I want to take a look at it and determine what number do I need to add to this left side of the equation so that I get the square of a binomial. Well, in other words, that I get a polynomial that can be factored into the square of a binomial. Well, if I rewrite this as x squared plus 8x, since my x squared term does not have any other coefficient out front other than the number 1, basically as a shortcut what I can do is I can come to my middle term and take a look at what my coefficient is for my middle term, my x to the first. The square of that will be half of that. Half of 8 is 4. So now if I square a 4, that gives me 16. So what I'm going to do is add a 16 to both sides of the equation. 20 plus 16 is now what I would have on the right-hand side. So once again, step 1 was to rewrite the equation such that all we're left with are the x terms on one side. We want to get our constant over to the other side. Next, what we want to do is we want to find out what value can we add to that left side of the equation now, and we have to add the same value to both, whereby it will then allow us to factor that into the square of a binomial. And I determined that that was 16. So now let's go ahead and actually factor the left side of this equation. X squared plus 8x plus 16. Well, if I factor that into the two binomials there, we're going to have x and x. That takes care of our x squared. And then we're also going to have a plus 4 and a plus 4. And what that's going to then give us is our middle term. We're going to have x squared plus 4x plus 4x. 4x plus 4x is 8x. And then 4 times 4 is 16. Now I could write it out like that, as I've just done. But for this method that we're going to be using here, this strategy, it's actually a little bit more helpful to not write it out that way, but rather to just go ahead and write the exponent right outside of that parentheses. Because remember, x plus 4 times x plus 4 is the same thing as x plus 4 squared. So the left side of our equation now has been factored. X squared plus 8x plus 16 factored is x plus 4 squared. On the right side, I'm just going to combine my terms here. 20 plus 16 is 36. Now, what I'm left with is on the left-hand side of the equation, everything on the left-hand side is now being squared. X plus 4 is being squared as a unit. Because it's being squared as a unit, I can now take the square root of the entire left side here, which means I also need to take the square root of the right side. Well, what is the square root of x plus 4 squared? Well, that's just simply x plus 4. So I'm left with x plus 4 on the left. Then over on the right, the square root of 36 is going to be plus or minus 6. I'm not quite done yet because x is still not by itself. Right now, we have a 4 being added to the x. So to get rid of that, we're going to have to subtract 4 from both sides. Well, if I subtract 4 from the left side, that just leaves me an x. And if I subtract 4 on the right side, that's the same thing as adding a negative 4. So I'm going to put that minus 4 out front and then do plus or minus 6. So x is going to be equal to minus 4 plus or minus 6. Well, let's go ahead and take each one of these individually. Minus 4 plus 6 would give us 2. So we know that one value for x is 2. Let's do the minus part now. Minus 4 minus 6 would give us a minus 10. The two values for x then that will work as solutions to this problem are x equal to 2 and x equal to minus 10. We now need to double check our work. Let's put in the 2 into our original equation. 2 squared is 4. 8 times 2 is 16. 4 plus 16 is 20. 20 minus 20 is 0. That works. Let's put in our minus 10. Minus 10 squared is 100. Minus 10 times 8 is minus 80. 100 minus 80 is 100. Or excuse me, 100 minus 80 is 20. And 20 minus 20 is 0. So 10 also works. Let's take a look at another problem. Here we have x squared minus 20x plus 3 equals 0. And we want to solve this quadratic equation by completing the square. Once again, in order to do that, we need to make sure that we leave both our x squared term and our x to the first term on the same side of the equation. But we need to remove our constant and get it to the other side. In order to do that, I have to subtract 3 from both sides. If I subtract 3 from here, this plus 3 and minus 3 cancel. So that just leaves me with x squared minus 20x on the left-hand side. And then 0 minus 3 on the right-hand side is going to give me a minus 3. Next, let's go ahead and complete the square. On the left-hand side, we have x squared minus 20x. And remember, since our coefficient for our x squared term is just 1, we actually have a shortcut for determining what the number is that we need to add to the left so that when we square, we get the square of a binomial. And that is, you take your middle term, your x to the first term, and you take a look at its coefficient, and you take half of it. What's half of 20? Well, half of 20 is 10. 10 is what we need to square. What's 10 squared? 10 squared is 100. What we need to now do is add 100 to both sides of the equation. So we're going to have a x squared minus 20x plus 100 on the left-hand side. And then a minus 3 plus 100 on the right-hand side. So we had to add 100 to our minus 3 that already existed. Now let's go ahead and factor this. Left side, we'll do it just as we did on the previous screen. You're going to have x here and x here. That's going to take care of our x squared term. We have a 20x here, and then we have 100 here. Remember, this 100 here, the factors of it are going to have to give us a middle term of a minus 20x. But we knew that this 100 was a square. So we know that that's 10 and 10 because 10 squared is 100. Now, do I need to make these pluses or minuses? Well, we have a minus 20x here, so our middle term has to give us minus 20x. Therefore, that means both of our 10s need to be negatives. X times x is x squared. That's what we started with here. X times minus 10 is minus 10x. Minus 10 times x is another minus 10x, which is our minus 20x. And then our minus 10 times minus 10 is 100. So this is, in fact, the square of a binomial. But once again, since those are identical, instead of writing them both out separately, I'm going to erase the second one here and then just simply put an exponent of 2 by my first one. X minus 10 squared is the same thing as the x minus 10 times the x minus 10 that we just had. Okay, that takes care of the left side of the equation. Combine our terms on the right side. Minus 3 plus 100 is 97. Now, everything on the left is inside parentheses, and everything on the left is squared. The parentheses on the left is squared, and everything on the left is within the parentheses. Because of that, that allows us to go ahead and take the square root of the left side here, which means we also have to take a square root of the entire right side. The square root of x minus 10 squared is just x minus 10. And on the right side, the square root of 97 is going to be plus or minus the square root of 97. X is still not by itself. We have a minus 10 being combined with it. So to undo that, we have to add 10 to both sides. Well, if I add 10 to the left side, the 10 and the minus 10 are going to cancel, so that just leaves me with an X. And then on the right side, if I add the 10, I'm going to stick it out front, and then I have to have plus or minus the square root of 97. The square root of 97 does not simplify for us here, so we are just going to leave it alone. So our two answers for this particular problem will be x equals 10 plus the square root of 97. And then our second answer will be x equals 10 minus the square root of 97. So as you can see here, completing the square can be a very beneficial strategy for solving quadratic equations. As a review, to solve a quadratic equation by completing the square, do the following. First, rewrite the equation into the format of ax squared plus bx equals minus c. And all that was is taking the standard format of ax squared plus bx plus c on the left side and just getting that c off of the left side and over to the right as a negative c. After you've done that, add a number to both sides of the equation that will make the left side the square of a binomial. After you've done that, take the square root of each side of the equation and then solve what remains. Lastly, don't forget to put a plus and a minus sign before a number that has had its square root taken care of. For example, if we had the equation x squared equals 64 and then we took the square root of both sides, that would give us x equals plus or minus 8. That finishes up then session 92 on completing the square.